BRICS group is set to grow from 5 to 11 nations from January 2024. The 15th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg has agreed to invite Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And they are, of course, wrapping up on the last day of this summit. Let's take you live now to our senior reporter, Siphamandla Goge. Siphamandla, very good afternoon to you. A lot has been happening today on this third and final day of the BRICS 15 Summit, including an address we saw earlier of the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres addressing the summit as it concludes. What message did the UNSG have for the BRICS bloc?
Adapt and adjust. That is the message that he was passing on to the members of this BRICS bloc, but also to the global world, saying it's time now to adjust and adapt. Global institutions, including financial institutions such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, they need to adapt, they need to reform. There have been growing calls and concerns that there is no reform and transformation when it comes to those global institutions, including, by the way, the crucial United Nations Security Council, which the Secretary General of the UN has been calling for its reform, saying it's unfair, it's injustice that really indeed there's been no transformation and no reform of the United Nations Security Council, saying it's unfair and it's injustice that Africa as a continent is not well represented or not represented at all in terms of that structure, saying that has to change. We did put to him as the media that, well, those are the calls that have been made before by other people who have occupied the same position that you are occupying. It would appear that your calls are falling on deaf ears. Well, he defended himself, saying, well, appears that there is some very little progress that is being made. He's not happy with that progress. He would want to see more pace in terms of addressing those reforms at the United Nations Security Council as well as the global financial institutions. Let's take a listen to him.
The continent is underrepresented in the global financial architecture just as it lacks a permanent seat on the Security Council. The world has changed, and so global governance must change with it. It must represent today's power and economic relations and not the power and economic relations of 1945. And that is why I've been advocating deep reforms to make global frameworks truly universal and representative of today's realities and more responsive to the needs of developing economies. We need more inclusive institutions at every level, including through greater representation of women and young people. But all this in a context in which I believe two areas require a particularly important reform effort. One is the Security Council, the second, the Bretton Woods system. If we are not able to reform our institutions and make sure that they reassume a truly universal character, we risk fragmentation, and fragmentation can be one day a factor of confrontation.
The issue of global reform seems to be very important to Guterres, I guess, as well as, of course, several of the BRICS leaders have also touched on the need for global reform.
South Africa is one of those BRICS members that have been calling for that to happen, particularly the United Nations Security Council, but most importantly, global financial institutions. Hence, you had a situation whereby BRICS members had to come up with the new development bank of this BRICS bloc to say, well, it would appear that global financial institutions are not willing to reform. They are not willing to take into account emerging economies, developing economies in the world. Let's have another alternative. It's something that the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned about, to say if the global institutions fail to reform, there will be alternatives that will emerge, and it will not be a smooth process for everyone. He says those outdated global institutions must realize that the world has moved. It's time to move with the new developments in terms of global politics and global economy. New players have emerged. BRICS is one of those players that have emerged with the addition or the expansion of BRICS membership. Many people are saying the new world order is here, which they say will be an alternative and will challenge the global status quo in terms of global economy and global politics. The UN Secretary General calling on countries to move with speed and negotiate in good faith in terms of embracing change and reforms. And those reforms have been supported by a number of BRICS member states, including India. By the way, we are expecting that a media briefing by the Indian delegation led by their Foreign Secretary or Foreign Affairs Minister will get underway around 4:30, where they will be outlining their positions in terms of what has been discussed. Yes, indeed, there has been that expansion of BRICS membership. A number of issues are still outstanding. The issue of having the BRICS currency, the issue of using local currencies when BRICS members trade with each other. So therefore, the UN Secretary General saying it's time for the multipolar world. Let's take a listen to him.
So this is a time to come together and to work together. But instead, divisions are growing and tensions are rising. Several factors contribute to these divisions: diverging perspectives on global crises, contrasting approaches to non-traditional security threats, different strategies towards new technologies, and of course, the consequences of COVID-19 and of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I remain deeply concerned over the risk of a fracturing of the global order. We are entering a multipolar world, but history has shown time and again that multipolarity without strong multilateral institutions is no guarantee for stability. It might even become a catalyst for chaos. So we must urgently restore trust and reinvigorate multilateralism. And this requires the courage to compromise for the common good.
That's Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General there, and with Siphamandla Goge waiting, Siphamandla, for that the briefing by the Indian delegation. Do you know when it's set to start?
4:30, that's the exact time that they had indicated they would want to get underway with this briefing. Of course, they will be outlining their country's positions in a number of issues that have been discussed. Not everything has been covered and concluded at the 15th BRICS Summit. Some of the issues will be carried over to the next summit, which will take place in Russia next year. So they will be outlining what is their position in terms of BRICS membership expansion, in terms of using local currencies for trade, and other issues that are still outstanding.
Thank you very much. Our senior reporter, Siphamandla Goge, they're monitoring that the last day of the BRICS Summit in Sentin. He's waiting for 4:30 when the Indian delegation will be addressing the media as the BRICS 15th Summit is wrapping up today.